Just a few days before Sandra disappeared, she heard what she described as a knockdown, drag-out fight coming from outside her window. When she looked outside, she saw Billy screaming at Sandra. As the fight escalated, Billy became physically abusive toward his wife.
What's up, Panic Fam? I'm Hannah. And if it's 2 a.m., the lights are off and the popcorn is gone cold, you know, it's Panic TV time. Welcome. If you survived this, and this, congratulations, all right? Congratulations, but your luck runs out here.
In Virginia, a classified ad lures a crazed gunman to his victim's home. Police must try to unravel the killer's identity through a few spent bullet casings. An internet romance turns deadly, and Texas authorities have no way of identifying the suspect. They turn to computer experts to track a killer through cyberspace. In California, 2 women are murdered at a movie studio theme park on Mother's Day. Detectives must rely on the victims themselves to point them to the killer.
You got the wrong guy. Great.
Often, victims of homicide are lured to their deaths by someone they know and perhaps even trust. But forensic examiners can expose the deception and reveal the killer who harbors deadly intentions. On the evening of September 24th, 1997, officers from the Newport News, Virginia Police Department were dispatched to the home of 35-year-old 𝐼𝐸𝐿. One of the man's friends was worried about his safety and called 911. When the officer arrived a few minutes later, no one appeared to be home. But when he made his way around the side of the house, he spotted a man lying motionless on the floor, taped to a chair. Unsure if the attacker was still in the house, the officer cautiously made his way inside. After securing the scene, he went to the victim's aid. The man, identified as 𝐼𝐸𝐿, was gagged and bound with electrical tape. Though he had been shot in the head, he still had a faint pulse.
2124, send me a medic to this location. I have 1 male with a gunshot wound to the head.
Paramedics rushed to the scene. 𝐼𝐸𝐿 was in grave condition. After removing the gag, the responding team went to work on the victim. Officers pried a .22 caliber pistol from 𝐼𝐸𝐿's grip. The gun appeared to be jammed. 𝐼𝐸𝐿 was rushed to the hospital. Shortly after arriving there, however, he lapsed into a coma. Detectives and forensic technicians were summoned to the scene to begin their investigation. Inside the home, they found no signs of a forced entry. But there were clear signs of a violent struggle and indications that it had escalated into a gunfight. A small caliber bullet, consistent with having come from 𝐼𝐸𝐿's .22, was found lodged in the wall. Several spent 9mm shells were also recovered near where the victim was found. On the floor, examiners found and collected a hoop earring. And there was one other potential clue. The title to Kaiser's Porsche, which was still parked in the driveway, was found lying out. All of the items were collected and sent to the crime lab.
Noticed mostly was there was two taillights in
Detectives
the back,
began
and
interviewing
right
Kaiser's neighbors.
Saw someone never seen before in the area.
Only
Came out
one
of the
had
house,
useful information.
got into a vehicle.
A few hours earlier, a man who lived across the street saw a tall, dark figure rush toward a vehicle parked in front of Kaiser's home and then quickly speed away. But the witness hadn't been wearing his glasses at the time and could offer no description of the man he saw. Detective Richard Gaddis was only able to uncover one clue.
This witness did note that the vehicle that this figure got into had a high third-mounted tail light on the back of it. That's all he could see with his poor vision as it went down the street.
Your relationship.
Hoping to find more useful information, investigators turned to the woman whose 911 call brought police to Kaiser's home the night before. She explained that Kaiser was selling his Porsche through a newspaper ad. He had told her that one prospective buyer, a tall, young African-American male, called him on his cell phone repeatedly and dropped by the house unannounced on a few occasions. The friend stated that shortly before the shooting, Kaiser called her and said the buyer had stopped by again. After a brief visit, the man left, saying he was going to the store and would return shortly. But Kaiser sensed that he was up to something. He armed himself with his .22 caliber pistol and asked his friend to call him back in half an hour.
No, I don't. No, listen, I got in the middle of the transaction.
When she did, there was no answer.
Now, what about the...
Though detectives were certain that the car deal had somehow turned violent, they struggled to identify a suspect. Investigators hoped that an examination of the physical evidence could help them develop a profile of the man responsible for the assault. Technicians at the Newport News Police Crime Lab processed the victim's clothes for any stray hairs or fibers that may have been left behind. But other than the tape used to bind Harry Kaiser, examiners found nothing. Looking to generate a lead, detectives released details of the assault and the investigation to area law enforcement agencies. A short while later, they got a tip from police in nearby York County, Virginia. A few months before Harry Kaiser was attacked, a York County man selling a luxury automobile had a confrontation with a menacing car buyer.
I'm asking $28,000.
A tall, young African-American man accused the seller of not thinking he was good enough to own a fancy car.
Huh? I can afford this car, man.
The seller feared the man enough that he immediately reported the incident to police. The suspect reportedly drove a Geo Tracker, a vehicle with a high-mounted third tail light, like the one seen leaving Kaiser's home the night he was shot. Newport News police were convinced the same man was responsible for both incidents. Investigators knew they had to find a way to identify this violent suspect before he found another victim. Detectives obtained a warrant for Harry Kaiser's cell phone records and searched for unfamiliar numbers.
We sat down with the phone records and weeded out all the people known to Harry Kaiser, his family, his friends. There was one telephone number on that phone record that was unusual to him.
It was traced to a home in nearby Hampton, Virginia, and it had been placed at 6:45 on the evening of the shooting.
The number right here looks familiar to you.
The homeowner knew nothing of the call or of Harry Kaiser.
So you probably didn't call that by any property?
The lead appeared to be a dead end.
House, anything of that sort?
But then, the woman added that her 22-year-old son had recently been looking to purchase a new vehicle.
Just a car.
Just a car.
Just a car.
His name, she said, was James Gatling.
He usually comes home in there.
All right, Mr.
Gatling was contacted and brought in for questioning.
Altercations.
Though he matched the descriptions given by Kaiser's friend and the man from York County, he hardly seemed like a person capable of violence.
Are you employed, sir?
Gatling admitted owning a geo-tracker and was upfront about having visited both the man in York County and Harry Kaiser.
I don't know. He didn't mind admitting that he was, in fact, the person that had been to Harry Kaiser's house on several occasions looking at this Porsche, but he simply denied having anything to do with the shooting or being there when the shooting occurred.
You're right there. Now,
When asked
where do
about
you-
an
where did that
injury
come
to
from?
one of his earlobes, Gatling could offer no explanation.
I don't know. I've got
And though the injury was consistent with evidence recovered from the crime scene, police had no way to prove it. After several hours of questioning, they had no choice but to release James Gatling. 3 days after the shooting, word came in that Harry Kaiser died from injuries sustained during the assault. James Gatling was now the prime suspect in a murder investigation. And accounts of his unpredictable behavior led police to fear that he was capable of more deadly violence. Police in Newport News, Virginia, were closing in on a suspect in the shooting death of 35-year-old auto mechanic Harry Kaiser.
Okay.
Though James Gatling admitted being at the victim's house the night of the murder, investigators lacked physical evidence that could tie him directly to the crime. Looking for a way to connect Gatling to the murder, investigators forwarded the 9mm shell casings recovered from the crime scene to examiner John Ward at the Virginia State Bureau of Forensic Science in Norfolk.
We got involved in this case when I received a phone call from Detective Gaddis, who indicated that there had been a murder in his city, and they had some cartridge cases from the crime scene, and they'd had a suspect but no firearm. Was there anything we could do for him?
Using a comparison microscope, Ward confirmed that all of the 9mm casings were fired by the same weapon. After thoroughly photographing the evidence using a digital camera, Ward then entered the images into a national computer database called DrugFire. This database can tell examiners if bullets found at a crime scene were fired from a particular weapon that has been previously test-fired in connection with another crime. When a bullet is fired, imperfections in the gun barrel etch a pattern onto the shell cartridge. Examined microscopically, these scratches and swirls are as individual as a fingerprint. The DrugFire database looks for other shell casings on file that have similar markings. When Ward finds a potential match, he superimposes the images to see if they share the same unique signature. Ward found that the gun used to kill Harry Kaiser had been test-fired in connection with another crime less than a year before. Police now needed to find out who had owned the weapon at the time. Investigators requested the case file and learned that 22-year-old James Gatling had owned the gun. 9 months earlier, Gatling was suspected of firing the weapon into a restaurant. But ballistics tests back then showed that Gatling's gun had not fired the shot. Though he and his gun were cleared in the incident, a record of his weapon would remain a permanent entry in the DrugFire database.
Once a weapon is analyzed and connected to a person, that remains a digital image for forever. So in a way, you've always got that gun. Even if you don't have the actual gun itself, you've got all of its markings and you know who it belonged to, at least at one point.
For investigators, it was a huge break in the case. Not only did Gatling admit to knowing the victim, he was now linked to the murder weapon. On October 2nd, 1997, James Gatling was arrested for suspicion of murder.
Turn the vehicle off!
His vehicle was towed to the police impound lot for a closer examination.
Step out of the vehicle!
Police obtained a warrant to search Gatling's home, but the 9mm weapon was nowhere to be found. Without it, investigators still hadn't conclusively tied the suspect to the killing. Police searched Gatling's vehicle for anything that could help physically link him to 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐳𝑟's murder. Though no weapon was found, police uncovered something they hoped would finally seal the case. A roll of black electrical tape similar to the tape that was used to bind 𝐂𝐴𝐳𝐼 to the chair. In the lab, technicians unrolled every piece of tape that had been collected from the crime scene and compared the broken or torn ends to the end of the black electrical tape found in Gatling's car. The tears from the two pieces of tape lined up perfectly. Now there could be no doubt. James Gatling was responsible for the death of 𝐂𝐴𝐳𝐼.
Put your hands up! Hands up! All right? Hands up and send the chick!
Police believe that shortly after 𝐂𝐴𝐳𝐼 talked with his friend on the phone, James Gatling returned to the house. Motivated by an unexplainable rage, Gatling overpowered his victim and bound him to a chair. After getting off one shot, 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐳𝐼r's gun jammed. Gatling then shot the 35-year-old mechanic and left the scene. James Gatling was convicted of the first-degree murder of 𝐂𝐴𝐳𝐼r and sentenced to life in prison.
Might have come into.
In the Gatling case, detectives tracked a killer who tried to hide behind the anonymity of classified ads. To catch a murderer in Texas, investigators would have to follow a mystery woman through an even more complex maze. In April 2000, 20 miles southwest of Austin in the hill country of central Texas, a rancher surveying his property noticed a blanket lying on the side of a trail. When he looked underneath, he discovered the remains of a decomposing human body. Deputies from the Hays County Sheriff's Office and officers from the Texas Rangers were quickly dispatched to the scene. After securing the area, the team began processing it for clues. But there was little physical evidence to be found. Recent rains had washed away any trace of the killer that might have been left behind. Other than the victim himself and the blanket used to cover him, nothing of any forensic value was found.
Okay.
Investigators speculated that he had been lying there for close to 2 weeks. And prolonged exposure to the Texas sun had left the body in a severe state of decomposition. According to Captain Sam Williams of the Hays County Sheriff's Office, identifying this victim would be a challenge.
Due to the advanced state of decomposition, there was no available fingerprints, and so we weren't going to be able to come up with anything there.
At autopsy, the medical examiner determined the victim had died as a result of a .22 caliber bullet to the head, most likely made by a high-powered rifle. But there was no way to determine how old the victim was or what he looked like in life. And with over 70,000 missing persons cases reported in Texas each year, investigators realized that searching through those reports for a match would be overwhelming.
I think it's the angle that it's taken.
The victim's teeth were carefully documented and photographed for future comparisons. To aid in the identification process, investigators called on the expertise of Dr. Dave Glassman, a professor of forensic anthropology at Southwest Texas State University.
One.
Measuring the width of the brow ridge and the dimensions of the eyes and nose, Dr. Glassman found this skull was consistent with a Caucasian male. To pinpoint his age, he examined the sutures, the areas where the bones of the skull connect to one another that close over time. One, called the basilar suture due to its location at the base of the skull, closes in most individuals between the ages of 19 and 24 years of age.
The determination that I made was the basilar suture had closed, suggesting that the individual was older than about 19 or 20, but the internal sutures were just in their very initial stages of closure, indicating that the individual would have been between about 19, 20, and 30 years of age.
With Dr. Glassman's analysis, detectives could narrow their search of missing persons to young white males. And though several files matched those criteria, only one had been reported a few weeks before this victim was discovered. A records check indicated that 20-year-old 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞𝐬, a sophomore from Texas A&M University, had been reported missing to campus police 2 weeks earlier by his parents and his roommate at the university. Having only the victim's teeth to help them make an identification, detectives quickly contacted 𝐂𝐚𝐬's family dentists.
Over the phone, their dentist literally described verbatim every tooth in the mouth to an exact match, which in forensic world is almost as good as a fingerprint or as good as a fingerprint.
The search for a missing university student had met head-on with a murder investigation. But with no solid evidence pointing to a suspect, investigators were still a long way from putting this case to rest.
Okay.
Authorities in Texas had identified human remains found on a secluded ranch as belonging to missing 20-year-old Texas A&M sophomore 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞. Looking to identify a suspect, investigators questioned 𝐂𝐚𝐬�'s roommate at the university who had reported him missing. He told detectives that just before the disappearance, 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞 had made plans to visit a San Antonio woman whom he'd befriended 3 months earlier in an internet chat room.
Oh, she's gorgeous, man. You want to take a look at her picture real quick?
Though they had never spoken directly, 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞 seemed enamored by photographs sent by the young woman, whose name was Kelly McCauley.
She's good looking, huh?
Detective Will Scott of the University Police Department learned details of the chat room romance.
The day that Kerry left Texas A&M was the day that he was supposed to meet Kelly for the very first time in person in San Antonio. The reason being that they had not spoken before, according to the roommates and friends. Kerry had told them that Kelly had her jaw broken by an ex-boyfriend. Consequently, the jaw was wired shut and she wasn't able to speak on the phone. However, she was able to communicate over that 3-month period by computer.
Studious, so it's kind of unlike him.
The roommate said Kerry left in his car for San Antonio and was supposed to return by the end of the weekend, but he never showed. However, over the course of the following days, he received emails from 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞 saying that he was having a great time with Kelly and was going to stay a little while longer. Investigators needed to question Kelly McCauley, possibly the last person to have seen Kerry 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞 alive. But the young blonde woman's whereabouts turned out to be a mystery in itself.
If we could match that, not that I'm aware of.
Investigators could find no record of her in San Antonio or anywhere else in the state.
The telephone companies
And tracking her down through her chat room login name proved more difficult than detectives anticipated.
With simple email, that's pretty easy to trace. But when you enter the realm of internet relay chat, it's pretty anonymous. And there's many different levels that you can go through to even make it more and more anonymous.
Ugh. Ugh, I swear my neighbors think I'm probably getting murdered right now.
To investigate.
As Hays County detectives continued searching for the elusive 𝐂𝐚𝐬, campus police at Texas A&M University uncovered a lead. 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞𝐬's car had been located at an airport near campus. A parking stub indicated it had been left there on April 10th, just a few days after he left for San Antonio to meet Kelly. The car was impounded and taken for a closer forensic evaluation. Detectives processed every square inch of the car, searching for any clue regarding Carrie's murder. In the hatchback, they found dried human blood. Tests later proved that it had come from the murdered student's body. But with no fingerprints found, determining who had been at the wheel would be difficult. The following day, Carrie's roommate contacted investigators.
Just sit at your desk.
Yeah.
He had recalled something he now believed was vitally important. In the days after Carrie had left for San Antonio, he returned to his dorm room and found a young man working at Carrie's computer. The man introduced himself as Kelly McCauley's brother.
Hi.
He said he was retrieving schoolwork for 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞𝐬. Unaware that his roommate was in danger, he didn't think anything of it at the time. Police were convinced that Kelly and her brother were somehow involved in Carrie's murder. But tracking these mysterious siblings along traditional routes had been unsuccessful. If police were ever going to solve this case, they had to find a way to track them down in the complex world of cyberspace.
There was nobody that was initially involved in this investigation from any of the agencies that we knew about that had any kind of expertise in the IRC platform or this form of communication or chat rooms or anything along those lines. So it was virgin territory for us.
Things were looking grim until an article about the case in the local paper brought a chat room veteran named Carrie Lee to police. He'd interacted with both the victim and the suspect online. And 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞𝐿𝐬 just couldn't stop talking about her blossoming new romance.
And we would hear from her that he was at her house or apartment or wherever, and he was in the kitchen studying, or he was in the couch watching TV, or Carrie and I are going to a movie tonight, and we heard details, again, that we didn't really want to hear. But it was all she wanted to talk about, and this went on and on and on and on and on.
It went on, investigators realized, days after Carrie was already dead. Police were learning a lot about 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞𝐿𝐬, except where to find her or her brother. Lee offered to help. He handed over a disc containing a phone number that 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞𝐿𝐬 had once given him. Investigators traced the number to a woman in San Antonio. There was no 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐞𝐿𝐬 living here, she said, only Kenny Lockwood, her 31-year-old son. At present, he was ailing in the hospital. Too sickly to work, Kenny had two loves in his life, his mother said: computers and Texas A&M University.
AOL?
Since being rejected by the college the year before, Lockwood spent at least 12 hours a day chatting on the university's website. With a warrant in hand, investigators searched the home. They noticed a red stain on the carpet under the couch. Tests proved the substance was human blood. Investigators searched Kenny Lockwood's bedroom. In the back of his closet, they found a weapon consistent with the type that had killed 𝐃𝐜𝐿. More incriminating, however, was a photograph found on Kenny Lockwood's desk.
Grab that.
It was the woman they'd been hunting, a photograph of the person they knew as Kelly McCauley, and it had been torn out of a magazine. It now appeared to investigators that Kelly McCauley was a fictitious creation. 𝐒𝐿's dream girl was nothing but a decoy. Investigators confiscated Lockwood's computer, floppy disks, and a number of documents. The only way to prove that he'd lured Carey to his death was to scour his and Carey's computers and retrieve all of the conversations that had taken place online between the fictitious Kelly and the unsuspecting 𝐃𝐜𝐿. David Burns of the Hays County Sheriff's Office was one of the investigators who scrutinized the files.
We took all of this information and then began pouring through everything that had been talked about on all those computers, that had been talked about in chat rooms, that had been talked about on emails, that had been, any conversations whatsoever that had been done online. We went through and poured over every bit of that information.
The recovered logs and conversations showed that the fictitious Kelly would chat online for hours, especially with Carey. Lockwood, pulling the strings, encouraged 𝐃𝐜𝐿's attraction. Ultimately, he suggested that the two get together in person.
Hey, is Kelly home?
Investigators suspect that when Carey showed up in San Antonio, Lockwood posed as Kelly's brother. Though no one will ever know what motivated Lockwood, the hole in 𝐃𝐜𝐿's skull told investigators what happened next.
At some point in time, things went wrong. 𝐃𝐜𝐿 was sitting on the couch when he received a .22 caliber bullet wound to the back of the skull, fell forward onto the floor, and was probably deceased before he hit the floor.
Lockwood then placed the body in the trunk of Carey's car, drove to a rural site, and abandoned his victim. He continued the charade by writing emails from Carey's computer to the victim's friends and family, assuring them he was alive. And most likely, he deleted a large number of files from Carey's computer in the hopes that detectives would never catch on to his drawn-out plan.
Here's Mr. Lockwood.
On April 27, 2000, Kenny Lockwood, still recovering in the hospital from an unidentified illness, was arrested for murder. Under questioning, he admitted to the crime.
He did provide us with a partial confession. At one point in time, he actually admitted to the shooting having occurred in his residence. He explained to us the history between he and Carey, that they had met on, and that he was posing as this Kelly.
But he would never stand trial for his crimes. A few months after his arrest, Kenny Lockwood took his own life.
She's beautiful. You want to take a look at her picture?
𝐃𝐜𝐿 was lured into believing that a stranger was a friend. But even an evening with one's own family can turn deadly. Los Angeles, California is home to 9.5 million people, many drawn here by the promises of fame and fortune. But on Mother's Day night, 1995, the upper level of the City Walk parking garage became the backdrop for one family's nightmare. Around 11 p.m., paramedics and deputies from the LA County Sheriff's Department were dispatched to the garage. 30-year-old Paul Carassi and his 2-year-old son had survived an assault by unknown assailants. But Paul's mother, 61-year-old Doris Carassi, and his ex-girlfriend, 29-year-old Sonia Salinas, did not. The two women had been nearly decapitated in a vicious knife attack. As 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐶 was taken to the hospital with a severe knife wound to the hand, police began processing the scene. Personal items found near the victims suggested the ambush had been sudden and without warning. Police carefully documented and collected dozens of bloodstains. As investigators continued searching for evidence to help them piece together what had happened, a 911 call came in to police dispatch. There had been another stabbing, less than 5 miles away. As officers from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office continued processing the scene of a brutal double murder, word came in that another stabbing had been reported a few miles away. Lying by the side of the highway, police found 44-year-old Donna Lee. Barely conscious, she said that someone had tried to rob her and steal her car after she pulled off the road. She had been stabbed in the abdomen and was severely bleeding. Despite the life-threatening injury, she somehow managed to fight off her attacker. Donna was rushed to the hospital. Police began searching the area for clues to the assailant's identity. A few feet from where Donna Lee was found, they discovered several items belonging to the victims of the City Walk garage knife attacks. They recovered Sonia Salina's identification, a fanny pack belonging to 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐶, and his mother's blood-stained purse. Nearby, officers found another clue. A blood-stained knife, possibly the one used in all of the assaults. Someone, it seemed, had gone on a violent rampage that spanned several miles. All of the evidence, including Donna's vehicle, were collected and forwarded to the crime lab for a closer examination. Sergeant Sam Muniz of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department was assigned to the case.
How many times did you see that particular night?
The brutality of the murders that took place at the parking garage was difficult to comprehend.
Okay, it was already late.
What motivates somebody to do that? You know, especially the way it's done. Because you look at these two victims and you look at, they're nearly decapitated. I mean, there's stab wounds from one side to the other and all over the bodies. I mean, this guy was either angry, if he lost it mentally, you know.
A few hours after the assaults, investigators went to 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐶's residence to notify his family that he was recovering in the hospital. Though no one appeared to be home, they noticed something strange. 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐶 shared an address with someone named Lee, the same last name as the victim found along the highway.
Called in on the radio, had it checked out. Police department.
Believing it had to be more than a coincidence, detectives went to the hospital to interview 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐶. He told investigators that he'd taken his mother, Doris, his ex-girlfriend, Sonia, and their 2-year-old son out for a Mother's Day dinner. As they made their way back to the car, someone suddenly attacked him from behind, forcing him to the ground. He heard screams and tried to fight back. But when he tried to grab the knife from the assailant, his hand was badly cut. He was then knocked unconscious. When he came to, he discovered the bodies of his mother and Sonia. Paul stated that he did in fact know Donna Lee, the victim found on the side of the highway. He worked with her at a local bank, and the two were romantically involved.
You mean the same thing as last night?
They had recently moved in together. In fact, his relationship with Donna had caused friction between him and his ex-girlfriend, Sonia Salinas, who also worked at the bank.
We can do that.
Sonia was seeking sole custody of their 2-year-old son and the garnishment of Paul's wages for child support.
You have a preference?
Despite those tensions, Paul couldn't imagine anyone who would want to target him or his family.
We had finished having dinner and
Convinced that the two assaults were somehow connected, examiners at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Crime Lab hoped an examination of the evidence would point them toward a suspect. They began by analyzing the bloody knife found at the Donna Lee crime scene. Serological tests confirmed that blood from all 4 victims was present on the knife. But no suspect fingerprints were found. Desperate to identify the killer before he struck again, investigators began scouring Donna Lee's car for clues. Though no prints were recovered, in the back seat they found a vital piece of evidence. It was a copy of Donna Lee's divorce papers, ending her 15-year marriage to a man named Frank Lee. For investigators, it was the first hint of a motive and of a possible suspect. Detectives quickly obtained a warrant to search Frank Lee's home. In the kitchen, they discovered knives that were similar to the one used to stab Donna Lee and to slay Doris Carassi and Sonia Salinas. Maintaining his innocence, Frank Lee willingly accompanied investigators to the sheriff's department. A physical examination of the suspect revealed no signs that he'd been in a violent struggle. But he admitted that his divorce had turned ugly, and he was bitter that Donna was leaving him for Paul Carassi. Though the impending divorce made Frank Lee the logical suspect, the motive didn't quite seem to fit the murders. For investigators, Paul Carassi should have been the target of the jealous husband's rage, not his mother and ex-girlfriend. Frank Lee was ultimately cleared as a suspect in the double murder. Believing some clue to the killer's identity had been overlooked, examiners turned back to the physical evidence. Criminalist Beverly Kerr started with the T-shirt worn by Paul Carassi at the time of the attacks.
I pulled out Paul's shirt and I looked at it, and we saw something that might have appeared to be a handprint in blood. We all looked at it, we all conferred, and we started feeling that that's possibly what it could be.
DNA testing showed that most of the blood on the T-shirt, particularly in the handprint area, had come from his ex-girlfriend, Sonia Salinas. But Carassi never mentioned that he touched either of the victims. Police decided to question him again. When asked how the blood got on his shirt, Carassi said he'd forgotten that he checked Sonia's pulse after he regained consciousness. He added that he had slipped and fallen in the pools of blood near Sonia's body. He must have wiped her blood off on his shirt. But with each passing minute, investigators began to suspect that Carassi was hiding something.
He went, muddling through the interview saying, well, this and that. And that's just all of a sudden hit me. He said, this guy has got to be, the person I'm looking for, because he just cannot get his story straight.
The investigation's best witness was suddenly the prime suspect in the brutal Mother's Day massacre. Looking to prove that Paul Carassi had murdered his own mother and his ex-girlfriend, investigators turned once again to the crime lab. Now they hoped that the murdered women's own blood would give them proof that he was behind these unspeakable acts. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department continued their investigation into a series of vicious knife attacks on Mother's Day that had left 2 women dead and 2 more victims injured. Now they had reason to believe that one of the victims, Paul Carassi, was behind the murders of his mother Doris and his ex-girlfriend Sonia Salinas. To prove it, criminalist Elizabeth Devine began reconstructing the events at the parking garage using Carassi's bloody T-shirt. Though 𝐂𝐚𝐬𝐸 had previously stated that he slipped in Sonia's blood and then wiped his hands off on his shirt, that explanation didn't jibe with the evidence.
Well, it was clear that a lot more had happened. There was blood spatter, there was contact transfer, which was from Sonia Salinas' neck, which was severely slit. I mean, her head was almost decapitated. Blood soaked all the way through onto his chest. That's not passive transfer of blood. That's not blood on your hands that you wipe on your shirt. That's something bleeding is up against your skin for a period of time.
And examiners determined that the handprint on 𝐂𝐚𝐸𝐸's shirt had not come from him. Sonia Salinas had left it. And there was more.
What the blood pattern on the handprint was able to show was that the person that left the handprint was alive because the person clasped the shirt as opposed to just touching the shirt. It also showed that the person that grabbed the shirt was bleeding because we had excessive blood around the fingertips. It wasn't like finger painting where you put your hand in paint and then you put your hand on a shirt. We had it extending beyond the margins of the finger, which means that the person that grasped the shirt was bleeding.
When the blood patterns on the shirt were compared to post-mortem diagrams of Sonia's hands, the injuries didn't all line up. Sonia had sustained more wounds after grasping Paul 𝐂𝐚𝐸𝐸's shirt.
She grabbed his shirt and she had not sustained all her wounds. So it was right in the middle of the attack. It was after the wounds started and before the crime ended. And seeing how he said he was on the ground and not involved, along with the spatter and everything else, it showed that not only was he involved, but he was within 3 feet of her, able for her to grasp him.
The analysis locked 𝐂𝐚𝐸𝐸 into the heat of battle. And further investigation revealed that he had not acted alone.
If you could slap one character for their dumb decisions, who would it be? Huh? Go on. Vent in the comments. I can't wait to read.
DNA testing proved that blood found on Sonia Salinas' shoe had come from Donna Lee, the woman who survived a knife attack shortly after the murders.
Paul's blood.
That meant the injury to Lee's abdomen had happened at the parking garage, not at the side of the highway, as she previously claimed.
And his shirt was right here.
To prove that Donna Lee had lied to cover up her involvement in the double murder, examiners began looking for answers as to how blood from her injury ended up on the victim's shoe.
The only way you could really get the blood to flow down the shoe in that way was if the shoe was in contact with her abdomen for a sustained period of time. And I tried many different scenarios, many different positions, many different theories about how you could do that. And really the only one I could come up with is that she held her feet to her stomach while Paul slit her throat. And that to me put her right in, you know, that's the business end of that crime scene.
This is Donna's.
Investigators concluded that Donna Lee had been accidentally stabbed in the abdomen as she and Paul struggled to overpower the victims.
Yeah, I answered the question.
Paul 𝐂𝐚𝐸𝐸𝐸 was administered a lie detector test. When asked if he killed his mother and ex-girlfriend, he responded, no.
Bad news for you, okay?
Test results indicated that he was lying.
Here to us, lied here.
Coupled with the forensic evidence, 𝐂𝐚𝐸𝐸𝐸 was placed under arrest.
You have the right to change your mind at any time.
Donna Lee, still recovering in the hospital from her wounds, was also placed under arrest for the double homicide.
Be honest. Did you watch the last scene through your fingers? Comment yes or no.
Investigators believe that Paul 𝐂𝐚𝐸𝐸𝐸, with Donna Lee at his side, began plotting the murders of his ex-girlfriend and mother when the financial strain of his impending custody battle became too much to bear.
As it is, Paul 𝐂𝐚𝐸𝐸𝐸 made limited money per week, and he had a lot of outstanding bills. So his problem was basically financial and, you know, taking the kid. So how do I plan to take my kid and get all the money, right? So what he's doing now, he's angry at both, because the mother also backed up Sonia. So he's angry at both of them.
On Mother's Day night, as Paul 𝐂𝐻𝐿 and his family made their way to the car after having dinner, Donna Lee was waiting nearby with the murder weapon in hand. Their plan to make the murders appear to be a robbery gone bad backfired when Donna Lee became accidentally injured during the assaults and was forced to seek medical attention while attempting to discard the victim's belongings. A jury found Paul 𝐂𝐻𝐿 and Donna Lee guilty of first-degree murder. Paul 𝐂𝐻𝐿 was sentenced to death. Donna Lee was sentenced to life in prison. For investigators, when a suspect and victim had an intimate relationship in life, proving murder can be a challenge. When the line between familiarity and contempt becomes blurred, it falls to forensic examiners to find the truth and reveal a killer's deadly intentions.